My name is Angelina Avedano, and this is Interspace, where we explore the spaces between us. Join me for discussions on a series of realities with thinkers, writers, thought leaders, and artists. Thom Carr has been practicing yoga since 1974 and has been teaching since 1986. He completed instruction in several Raja Yoga traditions, including Transcendental Meditation, Kriya Yoga, and Ananda Yoga. Thom is also a Jo Ray practitioner, Reiki master, and teacher, and has a bachelor's degree in psychology. He continues to study various traditions of yoga, spiritual traditions, and energy work. Thom currently works with his most dedicated students, coupling Western and Eastern modalities into his lessons. Please welcome Thom Carr. Thom, we've been working together for about 7 or 8 years. I honestly can't remember if it's 7 or 8. I think it's 7. And I must say that I have to credit you for so much of my peace of mind during this time that we're going through in the world, but also so much of my ability to integrate grief into my day-to-day life and to work with it in a positive way through meditation and your teaching. So first of all, I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. That's what I do. That's what I'm here for.
And our work together has really made all the difference. And so in light of that, I'd kind of like to go over some of the basic things that we had, the work that we've done. And I want to start by talking about meditation. And I want to ask you your thoughts about why is meditation so important?
Well, I think the main thing, first of all, the way I define meditation is anything that takes you outside of your ego. Okay, so ego would be the way you see yourself, your actions, your thoughts, your likes and dislikes, your emotions, your perceptions, your memories, all of these things that we usually use to define ourselves would be your ego. Okay, your personality, what people encounter when they talk to you, and social interactions and so on. The ego is really a collection of things that we do from the time we're probably in the womb. And this collection of things it builds and builds, and one thing associates with another, and we tend to define ourselves as this collection of actions, collection of experiences that we've had in the past and the ones we have in the present, and we therefore predict how things will be when faced with similar stimuli in the future. All of those things are things we do, experiences we have or have had or anticipate having. They're not who we are. Who we are is not a collection of actions or collection of perceptions or memories. Who we are is something much more fundamental than that. Who we are precedes any actions, perceptions, memories, etc. So anything that takes us out of this kind of really static of activity and into the quietness of who we are would be meditation. Okay? That's how I see it. So I think that's essential. It's extremely important because otherwise we're caught up in all of the problems, all of our past activities, and we tend to operate then from that platform of past associations and past experiences rather than operate from simply who we are. We're all conditioned kind of to perceive, react a certain way based on our past experiences. We're, little kids, we're infants. We don't know any better. We have an experience. We react a certain way to that experience. And this forms the basis of how we react to that experience in the future or an experience that looks similar to that in the future. And we automatically shut off a lot of options in terms of what we can do, how we can perceive, and so on, simply by having this programmed reaction into us. We're kind of like biological robots, We're based on all of these past experiences rather than who we are. Who we are is not activity. Who we are is being. Okay.
So when you say, and there's something that caught my attention is you say anything that takes us out of our ego.
Mm-hmm.
So for some people that might be, running or painting or even leaf blowing your yard,
Yeah.
So when you say that anything that you do that takes you out of your ego and kind of puts you in a sort of zone where you're not in performance mode, so to speak, or you're not unconscious to your performance and reactions, do those things count?
I would think so. I would think that, if we're constantly caught up in a defined concept of ourselves rather than an undefined non-concept of who we are, then we're going to be limited, period. So that limited aspect of ourselves can be transcended, and it would be transcended into the opposite, or an unlimited being of who we are. If it's unlimited, it's infinite. There's no boundaries. So then anything could bring us to that unlimited state. I think what it comes down to is a state of the nervous system, brain chemistry, whatever it may be. I don't think it's been defined by science. Maybe it has, and I'm not aware of it. But anything that allows us to experience that unlimited being, to me, would be meditation, because the purpose of meditation is to take us out of our egos, out of our contracted states of awareness and into an expanded state. Okay, now there are many expanded states of awareness, way more than I think science defines. And they're all limited except for one. Okay, they all have activity to whatever extent, however refined that activity may be. But there's really only one state that doesn't have any activity and yet contains all activity. And as a result, that one state is the state I'm talking about. Whatever takes you to that particular state, the deepest state of our awareness, and even kind of beyond our individualized awareness, that's meditation. We can take drugs, we can do all kinds of things to alter our consciousness, but it's not going to bring us there necessarily. It's possible some hallucinogens and things like that do, but they don't do it in a reliable way. It's not that every time you do this, you'll have this experience of going there. So that's much more haphazard as well as risky. The cultures all over the world have developed methods to be able to transcend our egos. And all of those methods, I would say, are meditation, even though the actual techniques may vary quite widely. They still have that same purpose of going beyond the ego.
One of the things that seems to be a problem, or I don't know, maybe it's not a problem, but for me, over the course of my life, and then coming to this practice with you and the work that we've done together and your teaching, I had a lot of, I would see, first of all, when I studied certain yoga or researched yoga and meditation practices, they seemed to be so formalized, and you had to do things in a certain way, and you had to be of this certain particular lineage, and it seemed very intimidating to me on like one side. On one hand, like this hand, like my left hand, I have all of this, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, that's not even really my culture. Would I be appropriating some culture? I don't even, I don't fit into any of that. That seems very intimidating. On the other hand, Thom, we have this kind of like commercialized meditation where you can, manifest your prosperity and while that's wonderful, it just seems like a gimmick to try to get you the most success and the most money and the best girls and feeling the best about yourself.
Yeah.
And both of those things seem to be, to me, the extremes.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to navigate what's going on with that presentation of meditation. Could you maybe unpack a little bit of that for me?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there is a lot of commercialized stuff out there. There's a lot of, people that promote what they call meditation. I don't think it is. It wouldn't fit my definition anyway. That are kind of out for a buck. That's what they want. They want to make a bunch of money, and they're not genuinely after real inner growth. Okay. The lineages, I think, and the kind of maybe strict understanding of it comes from the fact that I think the process of meditation is a fairly delicate one. And to preserve that process, they tried to make sure that other things didn't filter in to corrupt that process. So in the teaching of it, they were pretty strict, and most masters of meditation from the East or Middle East or West for that matter are pretty strict. You got to do it this way, because if you do something different, you're not going to get these results. And usually what was promoted was, get all of these extraneous thoughts out of your mind and focus on the object of meditation. Don't fall asleep, and don't get caught up in thoughts, and sit in a specific way, and don't move, and on and on and on it goes. And I don't think any of those things really need to be done. It's one of my main inspirations was probably the most famous meditation master from the East, who is Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who taught the Beatles and lots and lots of celebrities. And the way their organization comes on many times is, commercialized and, get rid of a lot of stress and so on. What they're saying is actually true, but it goes much deeper than that and much more profound than that. But the main inspiration for me is the fact that he said, well, you don't have to live in a cave. You don't have to eat certain foods. You don't have to make your mind a blank. You can fall asleep, and on and on and on it goes. What he said was simply be natural and introduce the technique and just be natural about it. And that really, really struck me. I think it's an insight that goes beyond the usual insight, because it's so simple and so effective to do it that way. So all of these types of commercialized or imposing philosophies and things on the process of meditation, well, you can get into the philosophies if you want to, but that's not meditation. Meditation is just the experience of transcending your ego, of going beyond that little box that we use to define ourselves and find out that we're much more than that little box. So when presented with, various types of maybe religious things that come from the Hindu tradition, a Buddhist tradition, Taoist, whatever it might be, to me, if you want to listen to that, that's fine. And if you don't have to, because it's about the experience. It's not about a belief system. It's not about a series of books or philosophies. It's about pure firsthand experience of who you are. When you have enough of that, and that's more apparent in your everyday life, maybe some of these philosophies start making sense. But the necessity to believe in them or to, subscribe to them is not, I don't think it's there. I don't think it's necessary. It may happen naturally as you grow, and you may see how all of these traditions actually are talking about the same thing in different ways, different languages, different times, different cultures, different geographies, et cetera, et cetera. And so they may express it in different ways. But if we're talking about infinity, well, there's an infinite number of ways to express it, an infinite number of ways to get there. But I think what we have to do, there was a saying I saw years ago in a book, and it was, there are as many ways to God as there are souls of men. and there is only one way. And, on the surface, that doesn't sound like it makes much sense. But in reality, I think it's true. The methods we use to get to this state, they're infinite. But it's that one state that we get to. There's still only one way to get there, which is to get beyond your ego. How you do it is up to you. The traditions sometimes say you have to do it this way and not another way. I would say, what one works for you? That's the one to use.
Do you think that was what Jesus was referring to when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life?
Yeah, I think, well, that comes from the Gospel of John, which is, I think, in many ways so grossly misinterpreted by modern Christianity, because John never has Jesus the man speaking. It appears to me, and I may be wrong, of course, that the long discourses that are in the Gospel of John are not the same as the short sayings in the other three Gospels. So we're not talking about Jesus the man speaking. We're talking about the Logos, the Word, as an incarnation of that Logos speaking. So when he says, I am the way, he's not talking about himself as a man, Jesus of Nazareth. He's talking about his identity as that deeper level of consciousness. So yes, I would agree, that is the way to get there. That is the only way. You can't get to that level of silence within, or the Father, which would be the way it was put in Christianity, without going through what they would define as the Logos, because that is the subtlest aspect of our own awareness and the subtlest aspect of all of creation. What method we use to reach that, and then, as also in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I am the door, and he's the doorway. Okay, that level, that Logos, is the doorway to the silence. There is no other way to get there except we're in activity, we slow down the activity, we get to the finest level of activity, which would be the Logos to me. And that's the only way we can get to silence. I would agree with the saying, I would disagree with how it's been interpreted for so long. And it's been interpreted that way. Good example of what ego does. We haven't had access to this level of consciousness on a mass scale. So what we think is, when we see this saying in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I am the way. Well, it must mean Jesus, because what else could it mean? We don't have a firsthand experience of something beyond our own egos to say, well, maybe he was talking about something much greater than that. And that's the direction I think we have to look in there, and for ourselves in everyday life, in order to transcend the problems and our own ego manufactured reality that we deal with every day.
Yeah, in fact, it seems like perhaps the whole crucifixion story, crucifixion and resurrection story, could be interpreted in one way, looked at in one way, as this ego death and this transcendence and the ability then to get beyond. And so is that what you're saying there?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I'm not saying it didn't happen historically. I'm just saying that the significance for us in the story is that we have to let go of everything that we've defined as ourselves, because we've defined ourselves, and that's the problem. We've put boundaries on ourselves. We get rid of the definitions only by truly being who we are, and then understanding what that is. We have to experience it first before I think the intellect can be refined enough to get what's going on. So the intellect doesn't keep making the mistake of saying, I'm in ego, I'm a small, bounded, contracted creature that exists on the planet, and that's all I am. There's not one spiritual or shamanic or whatever metaphysical tradition that says that's who we are. They all say we're more than that. Well, why aren't we experiencing it? Because we haven't been taught, on a mass scale, that we can do this and given a way to do it that's concrete. That's all we need. it's right there once we start practicing, and we keep practicing over a period of time, and it infuses itself into our everyday thoughts and everyday lives. We don't approach our lives in the same way anymore. We don't keep these boundaries between ourselves. We see that there's one source for all of it, that there's unity in all of the diversity of nature. And we have to approach that diversity from the level of unity to stop all the silliness, all the hatred, all the bigotry, and all the things that cause nothing but problems for ourselves, because we really poison ourselves when we do this, and for everyone around us. The solution is so simple. It's just that we have to be who we are. We're not paying attention to that because we're too busy doing what we think we are. We're too busy acting and defining ourselves, creating categories, creating boundaries. And the boundaries, then, we put value judgments on, which produce all of our problems. All of our problems.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk a little bit more about that activity and the ego. But first, I do want to, point out that I have no, and I know you don't either. We don't have any question about the validity of these Christian stories and the
Right.
historical relevance of them. But in my own work as a contemporary mythologist, it's to look at them with kind of multifaceted, and to check them and see how, turn them over and over and see what kind of meaning we can apply to our own lives, as you're saying. So
Yeah.
this story of Christ's, death and resurrection becomes something more than just this, they have this event that we idealize and in many cases worship, and that's good in and of itself. But then also it becomes a method and the way that we can go through our own transformation. And I think it feels very much when you're letting go of your ego.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you've
Yeah.
sat with me through many, many hours as I've let it go. It can feel like your own personal crucifixion.
Oh, yeah. It can feel like you're dying. I
Yeah,
mean,
let's
yeah.
talk about the violence of that.
Yeah. And that, of course, is what happened in the crucifixion. He died, and then was transformed into something much higher after he died. And yeah, it's not, the more we have our attachments to our habits, the way we've always done things, the more difficult it is to kind of extricate ourselves from those traps that we've built into our nervous system. When confronted with a stimulus or a thought or whatever, a person, we react a certain way. And we tend to think, well, I'll always react that way. The ego always wants its safety and security. I mean, it's built into us by nature to preserve our lives. This is how we keep going, make sure all of the threats are taken care of, and make sure we're secure. We have to define everything around us, because then we know it's safe, or we know there's a threat and we have to be on the alert for that threat. But when we let go of those things, the ego automatically thinks there's a threat. And by ego, I just mean ourselves, obviously, just that aspect of ourselves that defines itself in this way. When we get rid of our nice, neat little boundaries, it doesn't feel as safe sometimes anymore. We're leaping into the unknown. And I think this is true spiritual work. This is what the whole thing actually consists of. Not a series of beliefs, but a deep inner transformation that can happen from the deepest core of yourself to the more surface levels. If you're talking something that big, how can it possibly be some little incidental thing that goes on as you grow? It's going to be something that will have quite a bit of impact at some point. And that impact will be, wait a minute, I'm not just this, I'm something far beyond what I thought I was. But how do you get there? It has to be the death of the old self and the birth of the new self. And that death and rebirth theme, which you see all over the place, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean in ancient times, that's the whole theme. That's what it's about. How do you die? Well, you don't die. Your ego puts itself in perspective. We begin to realize that our ego and personality are not who we are. They're simply instruments that we use to express ourselves here. They're necessary. We need to have them. But that's not who we are. That simple mistake of saying, I am my ego, you're your ego, and the two of us are separate from each other, has caused all the suffering and problems. Because we're always kind of in a state of anxiety when we try to preserve our own individualized egos and bodies all the time. Because we don't know what's going to happen. There can be threats at any second, any time. In the course of the growth process, you run across those attachments that we have inside. Those things that, okay, I always thought it was this way, whatever it is. And I feel nice and safe and secure knowing that it's this way. And then you have an experience that doesn't fit into that nice, neat little definition. So then what do? Well, what most people do is either they run away from it in fear or they ignore it. And those are the two things I think we should not do in order to grow. If you fight what's going on, it's only going to get bigger. You know, if we think about it all the time and what's a good strategy of getting rid of this and wiping it out, it's going to get bigger. But the weird thing is, if you allow it to happen, it starts losing its power because you're confronting it head on. And I think this is one of the lessons in the Stations of the Cross in the Catholic Church. If you go into a Catholic church, usually on the walls, you'll see a series of scenes from Jesus' passion and crucifixion and death. Okay? And the theme that shows up over and over and over again in those scenes 3 times is Jesus falling. Okay? And in the first scene, usually he falls on his one hand and holding the cross with the other and his knees. Okay? And then he falls further in the second scene. The third scene, he's flat on his face. And in every instance, what happens? He gets up and keeps going. And I think that's the main thing we have to look at here, is that if we stop and go, oh my God, I can't do this anymore, this is too scary, or this is too something that doesn't fit into my understanding of reality in a way that feels safe for me, then we're never going to get there. But if we fall, if it's difficult and we thought we were on the right road and we fall down and we get up, then we get there. And that's what he does over and over again. I think that's very significant, that in those scenes, this is the only one that happens more than once.
You know, a couple of things come to mind as I'm listening to you talk about that, this identification. One is that, you know, coming in the beginning of our work together, I felt like I had all of this baggage from childhood, right? Childhood and and young adulthood, all the ways that I had just unhealthy patterns in relationships that showed up because of this, that, and the other thing. We all have traumas. We all have these things in our childhood that we carry with us. And to some degree, I think that also that our culture tells us a certain narrative about what this means for us and a kind of victimhood that we have. And or maybe it was just so as I was coming up, and that's the way I interpreted it and identified with that. So letting go of that over the course of these years has been, has taken some time.
Oh, yeah.
And redefining my relationship to myself, as you're saying, is like that we're not our past, that we're not these labels or how we've perceived ourselves. And yet, Thom, I guess the question becomes, what do we do with those painful parts of ourselves? I don't know that they will ever be gone. They are a part of us.
Yep. Yep.
And we have sometimes irrational things or things that we can't even name that seem to be a part of us that show up. And so how do we work through those, or what do we do with these things that are a part of us and that we have almost, I don't want to say that we have, it feels like if we would give up those pieces of ourselves, we're betraying the pain that perhaps a child part of ourselves went through, or a part of ourselves, the pain and the hurt that we felt. What would you say about that?
Well, I think because we identify with those things as being who we are, they're difficult to see in a larger perspective. They're the very things that kind of keep us trapped in our own definitions of ourselves. You know, we've had an experience maybe as a kid, and this experience scared us or was traumatic or whatever it may be, and that produces a very strong scar in our nervous systems, in our personalities, in our emotions, so that it's difficult then, with that kind of imbalance in our systems, to go ahead and experience other things in a more balanced way. We'll see it all from that particular perspective. The earlier it happens, the more it's a launching point for us to see everything else in that way. Or especially, we have to realize things that resemble what happened to us, we will automatically react that way, automatically when we see it, because it will bring up all the trauma or fear or whatever it might be, even though that thing isn't the thing that caused it.
Yeah, one of the things that you've taught me over these years is that when you say resemble too, it can be very like on the outside of that
Oh,
resembling.
yeah.
It doesn't map on exactly at
Right.
all.
Right.
That, you know, to be abandoned or to be betrayed,
Yeah.
that initial experience of abandonment or betrayal or trauma,
Yeah.
that there can be something that is only just remotely related, just a tiny
Yeah.
bit, and
Yeah.
then you're right back into complete
Right.
trauma response.
Yeah. And that can progress even further to that tiny, tiny resemblance, something that resembles that tiny thing that's even tinier, till finally there doesn't seem to be much of a connection at all. But in our minds, there is. It's based on past experience, not present experience. And so we, as personalities, tend to exist in the past because our actions are based on past experiences, not the present. Okay, of course, the future hasn't happened yet, but we project future things based on those past experiences. That's how anything is usually forecast anyway. So the result is we end up trapped in our own past, and we act in the present based on the past. And we never seem to break out of that pattern unless something happens to force us out of it. Usually it's not pleasant, but sometimes it can be very pleasant, and that will force us out of it too. Sometimes we need to go to a counselor, and that can be a very good thing, and we can learn to understand what's going on with us and how to manage the behavior and maybe change that behavior in a more appropriate way. But it comes down to the same thing, and that thing is we've defined ourselves unconsciously. We don't even know we're doing it, and we stay trapped in these patterns of behavior that just grow and grow and grow the more we do them. Kind of the more they get more energy, the more we involve ourselves in them, till finally they're a very easy default system when faced with a certain stimulus. There you go. Bang, you're right into that particular type of thought, emotion, and behavior, reaction. And that even influences our perception of those things, where something will resemble something else, and therefore it is that in some way in our minds. I don't think our unconscious, true to what Freud would say, is all that much in touch with what's going on in the present moment. It just reacts based on past experience. How do you get free of all of that? You let go of it. And how do you let go of it? By confronting it, allowing it to be. Are you going to be good at it at first? No. Are you going to be good at it halfway down the line? No. but you have to do it. And you have to do it over and over again till you get it kind of penetrates through to your unconscious that these things are not threats, that you're not 3 years old anymore. You're not going to see things in the same way or react the same way. With more awareness, you'll know that's not the case. So the key is that awareness. You can confront these things more and more easily the more awareness you have. The more you're trapped in your old definitions of yourself and your old definitions of life and the world, the more you're going to continue to feed those ideas, and the more energy they'll get, and the more trapped you'll become. So the escape route is what seems to our personalities and egos to be something you don't want to do, which is to confront the fear. I believe in psychology, they refer to it these days as like immersion therapy. You just immerse yourself in it. Just go, do it. Well, you can't do that to begin with. If it's a source of trauma and fear, that's the very thing you want to avoid. So you have to do it bit by bit, step by step, just like in behavioral psychology, bit by bit. Just as you're able to handle it, it will happen. But if you keep your same level of awareness, all you're going to do is kind of change your reflexive behavior, your automatic reactions to what goes on. You're not going to transform yourself. Transforming yourself necessitates more awareness. So if you're aware of what's happening to you when it's going on, that will change the reaction, the perception, and the behavior. Just awareness. And that sounds simple and sounds like, well, that can't possibly be true. But it requires practice, and it requires stepping beyond your normal definitions, normal reactions, emotions, reliance on memories, and so on, and just experiencing who you really are, at least at a level that's slightly beyond the usual ego functioning. Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the most valuable things that you've taught me has been that I'm not going to do this through my own will or my own power.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not going to accomplish some level of awareness through my own effort.
Yeah.
And
right.
Because I couldn't even I think probably that it was a huge paradigm shift for me to come to you. And I think maybe it took 5 years before I could even come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to reach a state, or we weren't going to work the steps, or,
right. Yeah.
And that it was, that I wasn't going to do this like I had done everything else in my life, accomplishments I had made, things I had overcome, that this was not like transformation as my next checkbox goal that I was going to do.
Right. Yeah.
But that it was something that was happening. Mm-hmm. And I had to get out of the way.
Exactly. The process can't happen if we dig our claws into it. As soon as we do that, we're going to manipulate it, and we're going to go right back to the same old functioning. The more we stay with who we are for our whole lives, really, or how we've defined ourselves, the more we can't go beyond it, because there's a definition. We've lived in a dark closet all our lives. We don't even know there's a door to get out. And we box ourselves in more and more till we think there's only the corner of the dark closet to live in. What we have to do is reach out, let go, be willing to see maybe there's more, so we can open the door to the closet. First, we have to find that there is a door, and then we have to open it. And then we have to have the courage to peek our heads out and see what's there. And finally, to step out of it and to see there's a whole room there that's light, and then go into another room and find a whole house, and then find a whole neighborhood, and on and on and on it goes. It's infinite. But we've really backed ourselves into these corners. But I think those corners can be instructive. If we approach them with awareness, we can see what we're doing. We can see how we're limiting ourselves when we don't have to limit ourselves ever at any point. When I taught classes for years, I taught for a local association, and they would have a catalog, and they'd list all the classes and put quotes from people who took the classes. And for my class, the quote that would pop up when in the evaluation forms after would be, I didn't know I had an option to act another way other than the way I've acted my whole life. That there are other ways to act. We get so caught up in let's take this route to go from this town to this town, when maybe there's 25 other routes we could take. And maybe some of them are more scenic, more fun to take. We get caught in these habit patterns. And the habit patterns just happen automatically based on our nervous systems. This is comfortable. And, well, sometimes we have to be uncomfortable. That's the only way we're going to get kicked out of our nice little comfort zone and our limitations. There's nothing wrong with being uncomfortable. It may not feel that great in the beginning, but after a while, if you get used to it, it doesn't matter. And then you're more and more free. The more picky we are in what we like and dislike, the more that's a signal that we're caught up in our egos and personalities. And we'll only probably get pickier and pickier as time goes on.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, you talking about limitations, because and I also want to talk about what I think might be a misinterpretation, but maybe you can help me with it.
Okay.
Around limitations and our own desires. There's this whole conversation in Buddhist philosophy about getting rid of our desires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And getting rid of our, well, you're talking about getting rid of our ego, but there's also some suspicion around, like, how do we empty our minds, and that we're becoming nothing. But I think it kind of goes to this point about limitations, and it's hard to follow the threads here. But I think that really what's happening might be a misinterpretation or a misconception, because
I think so. Yeah.
In order to get beyond limitations, you have to empty out all of this other stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah. Empty out, I think, essentially means lose our attachments to it. Okay? And by attachment, I mean something that we are kind of addicted to. We talk about substance abuse and addictions, but we all have addictions to certain people, situations, jobs, whatever it might be, TV shows, it could be anything, foods especially. And we have to realize that those are addictions too, that we feel like we need to have this. I've heard people say over and over again, I need, fill in the blank, when it's not something they need at all. I've seen people collecting things and they have to complete their collection. They have to complete their collection. Of course they don't. But they get so attached to it, and it's such an urgent need that some people go really to extremes to complete their collections. I think they're only trying to complete themselves inside and looking on the outside for some level of completion. That's never going to complete you. Okay? It's those attachments to these things that are the stumbling blocks. If we weren't attached or addicted to any one of these behaviors, foods, people, situations, etc., it would be easy to grow. We could just move on. We can't kill our egos. We can't make our minds a blank. We're going to think anyway. What we need to do is add that level of quietness and silent awareness to our thoughts, to our actions, to our relationships, etc., to begin to see these things in a way that's much more appropriate, much more open and expansive, much more inclusive, and begin to start allowing these things that have been traps for us all our lives to start falling away. They start falling away. They don't happen overnight. As you said, will you ever get rid of this? Well, I don't know what get rid of consists of for you, like this behavior or this reaction will be gone. No, it will be put in its proper context. Then, in essence, it kind of will be gone for you, but it will not be the same type of reaction even in terms of behavior as time goes on. But something that's triggered you your whole life is not going to disappear in a couple of years of
Mm-hmm.
practice. It's going to take time to readjust the functioning of your nervous system to something much more refined, much more expansive, and much more inclusive than what
You've
we've done
often
before.
described that to me as integration.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. It's integrating the silent level of our awareness with our activity.
Mm-hmm.
They sound like two opposites, and in experience in the beginning they are. But as time goes on, you begin to realize they're actually two halves of the same thing.
But when you're talking about this, Tom, does this mean that we don't desire things and we don't want things? Is that really what we're trying to get to? Because I would say that maybe I'm not desiring wealth and success and fame and fortune and
Right.
those kinds of
Yeah.
things, but I do desire. I think I would say I desire to have peace of mind.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
desire to have a life where I can experience joy. Is that the same when we're talking about desires?
Yeah, I think that's been a misinterpretation too. If we got rid of our desires, we wouldn't do anything. you know, it's again getting rid of our attachment to those desires, where they have to be fulfilled, and that urgency and that addiction to that behavior. And they're addictions just as much as any other addiction, which means they end up destroying us. They damage us. What's wrong with desire? That's how we get anywhere. It's how we, accomplish anything. We want to do something. Well, that's fine. But if we're totally attached to it and think it has to be a certain way, then we have a problem. If we would prefer it be that way, that's natural. And if it doesn't happen, well, we're not destroyed. And in point of fact, we're not destroyed when those desires don't come true. Maybe they will later. We don't know. But it's our attachments that cause all of these problems, all of this sorrow, all of this stress, all of this anxiety. If we just allow, then the awareness comes in. We put our desires, our actions, our lives in a larger context. Then they don't have the same impact. We're not caught up in them anymore. And we're free. In the East, they call it moksha. Moksha is freedom. Not freedom like, oh, I can do whatever I want, or I have free will, but I'm totally free within myself, and I understand how this kind of comes together and works. Maybe not completely, but I understand more. I get it more. And as a result, my life isn't filled with all these attachments. And as a result of that, all these anxieties, all these problems, et cetera, et cetera. The whole idea of, I have to accomplish my thing, and if you get in my way, well, too bad, is a good reflection of total attachment to ego and selfishness and how all of our problems start. The origin of all of our problems is we forgot who we are. And as a result, we've developed egos. We get attached to the egos. The egos have their likes and dislikes, and we end up being addicted to those likes and dislikes. And before you know it, we're caught in all those traps. And if someone doesn't agree with my like or dislike, we end up in an argument and so on, and all kinds of strife and conflict results. If we could just see the unity behind all of us and celebrate the diversity rather than put value judgments on it, it would be a pretty different world, I would think.
Well, and you said the magic word there, because I want to talk about judgment. It was, I think, one of the greatest gifts that you've given me, that's enabled me to grow, has been a space with no judgment. And that I know that, for years coming to you and just trying to let go of all these attachments to the past, to unconscious behaviors that I didn't even know I had, to suppressed trauma and emotions that I had not felt for my entire life, that, that caused me to act out in all kinds of ways all throughout my, life and adulthood. I mean, I was well into my 40s when I came to you, mostly unconscious, mostly completely unconscious to all of it. So all this acting out and not even really knowing how you create these messes in your life, and you make this, these disasters, and or the way that patterns kind of happen over and over again in relationships, um, but it really was this space of non-judgment. When I was able to tell the truth about things or say things out loud in a space of no judgment, it took all the energy out of it. All the energy then was dissipated, so I no longer found that I had to try to find a way to act out or felt compelled to act out, because obviously that's not a conscious process.
Right, yeah.
You're not doing it on purpose. You don't even know it's happening.
Right, yeah, that's the deal.
It was this beautiful space that you created without judging me for these reactions that allowed that letting go to happen.
Yeah, it can't happen unless we stop judging, because judgment, when you think about it, it automatically shuts off options. This person is like this because he or she acted this way. Well, of course, they can't be that one behavior. That's ridiculous. Or they have this series of actions that I don't like. Well, that is not even, a fraction of who these people are. It's ridiculous to be doing that. That's what we're doing. And when we do that, we shut off the option of, well, maybe these people have much more to them than what I'm seeing, and maybe I could get much more from it if I actually associated with them or were a part of their lives in some way, or they're a part of my life. Or anything, poison ivy is bad. Well, why is it there? It's bad for me. I'm allergic to it. It's no fun. So I avoid it. Poison ivy isn't bad. My allergy to it is an unpleasant experience for me. To begin to see the subtleties and the shades of gray here allow you to get rid of judgment. And how do you see that? More awareness. If you're aware of more of the situation, bad poison ivy, no, I'm allergic. Whatever fault is in my system, I'm allergic to poison ivy. It's not the poison ivy's fault. It just does what it's built to do. So if we see it in a less ego-oriented way, judgment starts falling away. When judgment falls away, all kinds of options open up in your life. Also, expectations is another source of problems. You're my wife. You have to act this way because that's what I expect a wife to do. Well, that's totally unfair to the other person. All I'm doing is imposing my ego standards on another person's ego. That's not relationship, and that's a sure recipe for disaster. That's not going to work. We do it unconsciously. And so what's the solution? To become more conscious, more aware. Then you see what you're doing and you stop doing it. If it's causing you problems and causing other people problems and stress and so on, why do it? We're free to stop doing it. We don't have to act by our judgments. We don't have to act by the fact that we can't see the whole picture. If it looks terrible and everything's black and awful and irregular, well, that's the jigsaw puzzle piece. It's part of the shade in the picture, and it's an irregular piece, and you fit it in the picture and you keep building the picture, and you'll see that picture wouldn't exist in its fullness without that piece that's dark and black if you just look at the piece. How about stepping back and having greater awareness as to what's going on and see the fuller picture? But we'll judge it by the piece.
Yes, and I think that I'm only beginning to learn how to apply that technique that you've used with me for all these years to myself, to rid myself of all the judgment, and it is definitely a practice and a process.
Oh yeah. It's just, as I've said before, just you have a particular experience and you react emotionally to that. And instead of projecting the source of your feelings on the outside event, feel the feelings you're having inside first. Then think whatever you want. But put your attention on yourself, because it's your feelings that are creating the situation for you. The situation, you could be in a stressful seeming situation. You're in a traffic jam. Okay, and you got to get to a certain place by a certain time, and it's getting near that time. And the traffic jam then is the source of your stress. But if you're in a traffic jam and you have no schedule, and you're in a city you've never been before, and you're looking around, it's not a source of stress. The traffic jam is still a traffic jam, but your reaction to it is what caused the stress. So look at yourself first, then go back to the situation. What are you feeling? You don't have to answer why you're feeling it. Feel it. Go through it. Understand. And you can understand intuitively without defining it and putting it in a box. You can understand what's going on with you by paying attention simply to yourself, especially in a stressful situation.
Thom, do you think that human beings, that we are unique and have a specific purpose while we're here? Or do you think that this is just a synchronicity that you and I have done this work together? Do you think that there's some kind of divine orchestration, or that we're just in this for the ride?
As a definite answer, I don't have one, but my feeling is that the reason we're here is to grow. And those situations, people, or whatever that will allow that to happen are the things we tend to bring to us if we're kind of on that wavelength. Okay? If our attention is moving in that direction, we will gather what we need for that to happen more and more and more and more. Do I think it's an accident? No. But I think it's a part of the process of growing and getting somewhere, and that it has a deeper meaning, and the deeper meaning becomes more and more evident the more you grow. Otherwise, it stays unconscious. With more awareness, you become more aware of what that is.
Do you feel like you have a purpose?
Yeah.
And what is that?
What I'm doing.
Okay.
Which is me, for myself to grow as much as I can in the time I have here. So my practice is kind of my job. And then to spread that awareness and knowledge as much as I can to others. But I can't spread it unless I have it.
Mm-hmm. Well, isn't that the truth? And that kind of brings me to thinking about what's going on in the world today and where we're at.
Yeah.
And, unless you have it on the inside, you can't come to a place where you can say everything is as it should be.
Right.
And
right.
Can we look around in the world today, Thom, and say everything is as it should be?
Well, probably. Okay. On the surface, well, no, it doesn't look very good at all. We have a lot of social unrest, a lot of, kind of rampant selfishness and, ego attachment and, a virus that's overtaking the world. Not a good situation on the surface, but maybe that's a whole series of those dark jigsaw puzzle pieces that we don't see the whole thing yet. First of all, it's a matter of time before a larger picture would emerge, and we're caught in the stream of time, and we only see the events as they happen moment by moment in a sequence. If we see the whole thing simultaneously, it would look very different than the way it looks going through the time stream in sequence as we're doing. So I think these symptoms show where ego attachment and defining ourselves only by our personality, where those principles lead us. And they lead us into more and more problems, more and more contraction of awareness, which is certainly what's happening now, and more and more decay of ourselves. That people become less and less human. They act in ways that are less and less human. And this has been true throughout, recorded history. It's not just our time. Go back to ancient Rome or Nazi Germany or Russia under Stalin, or on it goes. You can pick any number of things. And what you'll find is that same symptom, selfishness. I'm not you. You're not me. I'm completely separate from everyone and everything else. And the more I isolate myself, the more problems I get. Yet somehow we don't seem to get the lesson. I think we don't get the lesson because we don't know how to solve it. We don't know that we can go beyond ourselves, that there are ways to do this, definite ways to do it. And those ways, again, is what I would define as meditation. That is how you're no longer caught up in all of this. You can have all of these events go on and not be attached to it. Doesn't mean you don't act or try to change things. You do. You don't sit in a cave somewhere and let it all go by. You do let it all go by, but you're part of that going by as well as watching it go by. So you do speak up, you do act, that is what Jesus did, right? Got him in a lot of trouble. That's what he did. He came out and called the Pharisees hypocrites, and, people that said they were spiritual, but they didn't know the first thing about it, according to him. So, yeah, that usually gets you in trouble when you do it, but we do it anyway, because it seems to be the right thing to do. So we have to step outside of current events and see the whole picture more fully in order to understand how it's okay, how we need the dark in order to have the light. We wouldn't know light without dark. We wouldn't know dark without light. It's a balance. The duality is there, the yin-yang symbol. It's, the dark part and the white part, but they're together in one circle. It's one thing. We have to step back, get out of the dark half of that symbol, and not just stay in the light half, but step back and see both halves as one whole. That's when we start seeing it differently.
And so how do you think this happens? It sounds so much like what you're talking about on the collective, when what's happening in the world is that internal battle that we have with ourselves and our ego. So then how do we manifest that change as a collective?
Well, I think there has to be a certain maybe breaking point of the number of people that are stepping outside of their egos to have an influence on the number that are not. Whatever that number is, sometimes apparently you need like one person that can change everything. If we have probably a small number, we could probably change quite a bit if the number was at, that critical mass where it would change things around. Obviously, what's happening individually with people has an influence on society. Nationalism is just big egotism. It's just another version of being attached to ego. It's just a larger ego, which is called the country you're living in. And that ends up in disaster, as we've seen over and over again. So the society mirrors what's going on with enough people individually to have that impact on society. The past election shows how split we are. It was almost even, just a tiny bit over even. And so we're not united at all as a United States at this point. And the point is to become united. That makes the whole difference. It's the old saying I guess maybe it was in wartime: united we stand, and divided we fall. We're divided, so we will fall if we continue on this trajectory. But individuals that are growing beyond the ego don't have to fall. And if there's enough influence there, neither does the country. That can change around too.
Well, Thom, I can't thank you enough for bringing that message and that wisdom into my life and helping me to integrate that split and my own separation within myself. And of course, I work on it on a daily basis, and it's I don't think it will ever completely happen, but it is a process, and with your support and your teaching, I know I will continue. So thank you so much again for explaining it. And I hope that we can continue more conversations about this work that you're doing.
Sure, that would be great. I hope we can continue too. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
I feel so fortunate to have such a wonderful teacher and friend in Thom Carr, and to share his wisdom with all of you. If you would like to know more about Thom and his work, you can email him at thomyoga@comcast.net. That's THOMYOGA@comcast.net. You have been listening to Interspace with Angelina Avedano. My heartfelt gratitude and appreciation goes to my husband, David Needs, Senior Production Engineer. If you would like to learn more about me or my work, look for me on Facebook and Instagram, Dr. A. Avedano with Cicada Personal Metamorphosis. That's Cicada with a Y, CYCADA. Or you can email me at dr.aavedano@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. This is Angelina reminding you that we're all connected.